My name is Nora, and I'm 68 years old. For 40 years, I believed my marriage to Ronald was built on love and respect. I dedicated my life to our family, our 3 children, and our beautiful home. Then one day, I returned from lunch with my friend to find all my belongings moved to the garage. My husband had decided his girlfriend needed my bedroom more than I did. What they didn't know was that house was legally mine. Where are you watching from today? If you want to hear how I sold our house overnight and left them all homeless by morning, hit subscribe and stay with me. My story begins with the life I built with Ronald over 40 years. We met at a teachers' conference in 1982. I was 28, passionate about my career as an elementary school teacher, and he was 30, a charming real estate agent with ambitious dreams. He proposed 6 months later, and within 2 years, we had purchased the land where we would build our dream home in Oak Valley, a quiet suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors. The construction of our house became Ronald's passion project. He spent weekends consulting with architects, selecting materials, and overseeing every detail. I remember standing on the empty lot holding blueprints as he described where each room would be, how the afternoon light would fill the kitchen, and how our future children would play in the backyard. The pride in his voice made me fall in love with him all over again. By the time we moved in, I was pregnant with our first child, James. 2 years later, Amanda joined our family, and 3 years after that, Daniel completed our little crew. Our house grew along with our family, adding a treehouse in the backyard, converting the basement into a playroom, and eventually building an extension for a larger kitchen where I could teach the children to bake. Throughout those years, I continued teaching 4th grade at Oak Valley Elementary. I loved my students, but my family always came first. I was the mom who volunteered for field trips despite having papers to grade, who stayed up late, making costumes for school plays, and who kept detailed scrapbooks of every birthday and milestone. Meanwhile, Ronald's real estate business flourished. He had an undeniable talent for closing deals and an ambitious drive that sometimes kept him working late, but he always made time for family dinners and weekend outings. As the children grew older, I noticed subtle changes in Ronald. The warmth in his eyes when he looked at me began to dim. Conversations that once flowed easily became perfunctory exchanges about schedules and bills. I told myself it was normal. Marriages ebb and flow after all. When he turned 60 and retired from active real estate work, passing most of his clients to younger agents while maintaining a supervisory role, I thought we would reconnect, perhaps travel together, or take up new hobbies. Instead, the distance between us grew. His phone became a constant companion, and he would step outside to take calls, something he had never done before. Late nights at the office became more frequent despite his reduced workload. When I asked about his day, his answers were vague and dismissive. The signs were there, but I refused to see them. The truth revealed itself on a rainy Tuesday in October. Ronald had left his tablet on the kitchen counter, and a notification flashed across the screen. A message from someone named Linda with a red heart emoji beside her name. The message preview was enough. "Can't wait to see you tonight, my love." My hands trembled as I opened the tablet to find months of intimate conversations, plans for meetups at hotels, and promises of a future together. Linda Palmer was 20 years younger than me, a former colleague of Ronald's who had taken over many of his clients. In their messages, Ronald complained about our marriage, describing me as boring, nagging, and showing my age. Reading those words from the man who had once promised to love me forever shattered something inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. When I confronted him that evening, showing him the messages with tears streaming down my face, I expected remorse, perhaps even a desperate plea for forgiveness. Instead, he became defensive, then angry, accusing me of invading his privacy. "What did you expect, Nora? We've been married for 40 years. Did you think passion lasts that long?" His callousness stunned me into silence. Despite this crushing betrayal, I wasn't ready to walk away from 4 decades of marriage. We had built a life together, raised 3 wonderful children, and created countless memories in our home. I suggested counseling, which he reluctantly agreed to attend, but spent each session checking his watch and giving minimal responses. After the 3rd session, he announced he was done wasting time on a lost cause. The children were adults with their own lives now. James working as a financial advisor in the city, Amanda running a successful bakery inspired by our kitchen sessions, and Daniel teaching history at the local high school. When I tearfully confided in them about their father's affair, their reactions wounded me almost as deeply as Ronald's betrayal. James, always his father's son, suggested I should try harder to keep Ronald interested. Amanda avoided taking sides directly, but began making excuses to cancel our weekly lunch dates. Only Daniel showed genuine concern, offering to speak with his father, though it made little difference. I later discovered that Ronald had been systematically turning them against me for months, claiming I had become bitter and difficult to live with. What none of them knew was that he had been offering financial incentives, promising James a substantial investment in his firm, discussing buying Amanda a larger space for her bakery, and hinting at paying off Daniel's remaining student loans. Money had always been Ronald's love language, and he used it skillfully to secure their loyalty. As weeks passed, our house began to feel less like my home and more like a beautifully decorated prison. Ronald would come and go as he pleased, sometimes not returning for days. I continued teaching, finding solace in my classroom, where at least I still had purpose and respect. But returning home each day became increasingly difficult, the weight of loneliness and betrayal growing heavier with each passing week. The first clear sign that something was terribly wrong came during our monthly family dinner. These gatherings had once been joyful occasions, filled with laughter and updates on everyone's lives. But this particular Sunday in November felt different from the moment my children arrived. James avoided eye contact, focusing intensely on his phone between brief, strained conversations. Amanda, usually warm and affectionate, gave me a quick, formal hug before busying herself in the kitchen, refusing my offers to help with the meal she had insisted on preparing. Daniel seemed uncomfortable, his usual easygoing manner replaced with nervous glances between his father and siblings. Ronald, meanwhile, appeared unusually cheerful, dominating the conversation with stories about his golf game and plans for renovating parts of the house. When I mentioned that this was the first I'd heard about any renovations, he waved off my concern. "Just some ideas I've been discussing with the kids. Nothing you need to worry about." During dessert, I excused myself to use the bathroom, but paused in the hallway when I heard James's lowered voice. "So, we're all set for Thursday then, Dad? Are you sure about the timing of all this?" "Absolutely," Ronald replied confidently. "The plan is foolproof. Your mother will be out with Judith all day. We'll have everything moved by the time she gets back." "I still think we should have talked to her first," Daniel said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Amanda hushed him immediately. We've been over this, Dan. Dad says this is the only way. Mom won't be reasonable otherwise. I returned to the table with my heart pounding, pretending I had heard nothing. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, as I struggled to understand what they could possibly be planning. When they left, Ronald announced he had some paperwork to finish and disappeared into his office, leaving me alone with my growing anxiety. That Thursday, Judith, my oldest friend, and one of the few who had remained steadfastly loyal throughout my marital troubles, invited me to lunch and a matinee movie. Looking back, I wonder if she knew something was about to happen. She seemed particularly determined to keep me out all day, suggesting shopping after the movie, and then an early dinner. By the time she dropped me home, it was nearly 7 in the evening. I noticed immediately that Ronald's car was in the driveway, along with James's sleek BMW and a white SUV I didn't recognize. As I approached our front door, I reached for my keys, only to find that they no longer fit the lock. Confused, I tried again, wondering if in my distracted state I had attempted to use the wrong key. But no, after 40 years, I certainly knew which key opened my own front door. I rang the doorbell, waiting in the growing darkness, with a sense of foreboding. No one answered. I rang again, then began knocking, calling out Ronald's name with increasing urgency. Still nothing. Finally, I remembered the spare key we kept hidden in the garden shed. With shaking hands, I retrieved it and was relieved when it turned in the lock. The house was oddly quiet as I stepped inside. "Ronald," I called out. "James, is anyone home?" Only silence answered me. I made my way upstairs to our bedroom, noting with unease that several family photos had been removed from the walls. When I reached the master bedroom, the room I had shared with Ronald for decades, I froze in the doorway, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The room was completely transformed. Our antique oak bedroom set that we had purchased for our 10th anniversary was gone, replaced with modern minimalist furniture I had never seen before. The walls, previously a warm sage green I had carefully selected, were now painted a stark white. My reading chair by the window, the handmade quilt from my mother that always lay across our bed, my jewelry box on the dresser, all gone. Every trace of my existence had been erased. In a daze, I checked the closet to find all my clothes missing. The ensuite bathroom no longer contained my toiletries or medications. It was as if I had never lived there at all. A noise from downstairs pulled me from my shocked stupor. I hurried down to find Ronald, James, and Amanda in the kitchen, along with a blonde woman I recognized from social media photos as Linda. They fell silent when they saw me exchanging uncomfortable glances. "What's happening?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. "Where are my things?" Ronald cleared his throat, stepping forward with the confident smile he had always used when closing difficult deals. "Nora, we need to talk about some changes. Linda is moving in, and we thought it would be easier this way." Easier. The word felt foreign on my tongue. "Easier for whom?" "For everyone," James interjected smoothly. "Dad's explained the situation to us. The marriage is over, Mom. It's time to accept that and move forward." Amanda wouldn't meet my eyes, but added, "We've set up a space for you. All your things are there." "What space? What are you talking about?" I felt like I was in some bizarre nightmare. Daniel appeared from the hallway, leading to the garage, his expression pained. "Mom, I'm sorry. This isn't right, but Dad insisted." "Show me," I interrupted, unable to bear any more explanations. Daniel led me to the garage, the uninsulated detached garage, where we stored garden tools, Christmas decorations, and rarely used sports equipment. There, arranged in a pitiful attempt at a living space, were my belongings. My bed had been haphazardly assembled in one corner. A small desk held my laptop. Cardboard boxes labeled Nora's clothes and Nora's personal items were stacked against the wall. My life had been reduced to a makeshift bedroom in a garage. On my pillow lay a handwritten note in Ronald's distinctive scrawl. "This is temporary, while we figure things out. Linda needs to move in now, for financial reasons. Be reasonable." The fluorescent garage lights buzzed overhead as I stood there, surrounded by the remnants of my life, feeling a coldness that had nothing to do with the November chill. I didn't cry. Shock had frozen my tears. Instead, I quietly closed the garage door, locking it from the inside, and sat on the edge of my displaced bed. That night, I slept fitfully in the garage, wrapped in multiple blankets to ward off the cold. The space heater Daniel had guiltily provided barely made a difference. As I lay there, listening to the occasional sounds from the house, laughter music, life continuing without me, the full weight of my family's betrayal pressed down on my chest until I could barely breathe. Morning came with harsh, fluorescent light and the sound of the garage door opening. Ronald stood there in his bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, looking at me as if I were a minor inconvenience in his day. "Bathroom's free if you need it," he said casually. "We'll need to work out a schedule for that. Linda likes to take her time getting ready in the mornings." I stared at him, this stranger who had once been my husband, and said nothing as I gathered my toiletries and walked past him into what had been my home. Later that day, all 3 of my children arrived, presumably called by Ronald to help manage the situation. James was brisk and businesslike, explaining that this arrangement made the most sense for now, while I looked for an apartment. Amanda suggested I view this as an opportunity for a fresh start. Only Daniel seemed genuinely troubled, pulling me aside to whisper, "I tried to talk them out of this, Mom. I'm so sorry." When I asked why they hadn't discussed this with me beforehand, why they had gone behind my back to evict me from my own bedroom, the responses were variations on a theme. I wouldn't have been reasonable. I would have made things difficult. This way was cleaner, as if 40 years of marriage could be sanitized and disposed of like a minor biohazard. That night, as I lay again in my garage bedroom, I realized with devastating clarity that in the story, my family was telling themselves I was the villain, the unreasonable aging woman standing in the way of their happiness and progress. Somehow, they had convinced themselves that this cruelty was justified. And, for the first time since discovering Ronald's affair, I began to wonder if there was any love left worth fighting for. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of humiliation and heartache. I requested a week of personal leave from school, unable to face my colleagues and students while my life was imploding. Each morning, I would wait until I heard Ronald's car leave the driveway before venturing into the house to shower and prepare a simple breakfast, which I would take back to the garage to eat in solitude. Linda had fully moved in her presence, evident in the new decorative touches appearing throughout the house. Modern art prints replacing family photos, scented candles, where my houseplants once stood sleek gadgets cluttering the kitchen counters. She rarely acknowledged me when our paths crossed, treating me with the awkward politeness one might show a stranger who had wandered into the wrong house. The worst part was the sound of family life continuing without me. From my garage exile, I could hear dinner conversations, laughter, and music. My children visited frequently, not to see me, but to join Ronald and Linda for meals or movie nights. Occasionally, Daniel would slip away to spend a few minutes with me, bringing coffee or a book he thought I might enjoy. His eyes filled with a guilt he couldn't quite articulate. One evening, about a week into this arrangement, I heard the distinctive sound of glasses clinking and excited voices. Curiosity drew me to peek through the garage window that faced the kitchen. There, gathered around our dining table, the oak table where we had celebrated birthdays, Thanksgivings, and countless family moments, were Ronald, Linda, James, Amanda, and Daniel. They were raising champagne glasses in a toast, their faces animated with joy. I couldn't hear the exact words, but the context became clear when Linda extended her left hand, a diamond ring catching the light as Amanda squealed and hugged her. My replacement wasn't just moving in. She was being welcomed into the family with an engagement celebration, and no one had thought to include me or even warn me. That night, Ronald came to the garage, his movements slightly unsteady from champagne. "I wanted to tell you myself before you heard it from someone else," he said, leaning against the wall. "Linda and I are getting married as soon as the divorce is final." When I didn't respond, he continued, his voice taking on an edge of cruelty I had never heard before. "You know, Nora, this wouldn't be necessary if you had taken better care of yourself over the years. Linda makes an effort. She goes to the gym, keeps up with trends. Men notice these things." His words cut deep, targeting insecurities I hadn't even realized he knew I had. I had always been comfortable in my own skin, proud of the laugh lines that showed a life well lived, the softness that came from bearing and nurturing 3 children. To hear him weaponize my appearance after 4 decades together felt like the ultimate betrayal. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "Does it matter? It's happening now. You should start looking for apartments. Something small. You won't need much space." After he left, I sat in the darkness, wondering how I had missed the signs that the man I married had become capable of such calculated cruelty. Had he always been this person beneath the charm, or had something fundamental changed? The next day brought new humiliations. I returned from a walk to find Amanda and Linda sorting through kitchen cabinets, discarding items that were outdated, many of them wedding gifts or family heirlooms. When I objected, Amanda looked at me with something close to pity. "Mom, these things are so old-fashioned. Linda has much nicer, modern pieces she's bringing in. We saved a few things we thought you might want for your new place." She gestured to a small box containing a mismatched assortment of utensils and dishes, the cast-offs deemed not good enough for the renovated kitchen. That evening, I overheard James on the phone discussing financial matters with Ronald. Phrases like asset division and minimizing losses drifted through the air vents connecting the house to the garage. They were planning how to ensure I received as little as possible in the divorce. The following day, I discovered that my access to our joint bank account had been restricted. My card was declined when I attempted to buy groceries, leaving me standing at the checkout counter with a line of impatient customers behind me. When I called the bank, they informed me that the account status had been changed to require dual authorization for withdrawals, a change requested by Ronald. When I confronted him, he dismissed my concerns. "It's just a precaution. You've been emotional lately, and I can't have you making irrational financial decisions." The final revelation came when I was searching for important documents in the home office. Hidden in Ronald's desk drawer was a folder containing lease applications for a small one-bedroom apartment in a run-down area of town. An apartment with my name on the application. Next to it was a document outlining plans to renovate and sell our house once I was relocated. The date on these papers was from 3 months earlier, long before I had discovered his affair with Linda. This hadn't been a spontaneous decision or an unfortunate consequence of our marriage breaking down. This had been a calculated campaign to remove me from my home and replace me with a younger woman, all while preserving Ronald's access to the house and assets we had built together. And my children, the children I had loved and nurtured, were complicit in this plan. That night, as I lay on my bed in the garage, staring at the ceiling, something inside me shifted. The paralyzing grief that had consumed me began to transform into something harder and more focused. If Ronald thought I would quietly accept this treatment and slink away to a tiny apartment while he and Linda enjoyed the fruits of my 40 years of love and labor, he was about to learn how deeply he had miscalculated. Sleep eluded me that night in the garage. The temperature had dropped, and despite the space heater and multiple blankets, a bone-deep chill had settled into my body. But it wasn't just the cold keeping me awake. It was a storm of thoughts and emotions cycling through my mind. Around 3 in the morning, a memory surfaced with sudden clarity. 10 years earlier, when Ronald's real estate business was experiencing its most profitable period, he had made an unusual request. For tax purposes and liability protection, he suggested putting our house solely in my name. As he explained it, then, this would protect our primary residence from any potential lawsuits related to his business dealings. Smart people structure their assets intelligently, he had said, with that confident smile I once found so reassuring. This way, no matter what happens with my business, no one can touch our home. I had signed the papers without much thought, trusting his expertise in real estate matters. Over the years, I had forgotten about this arrangement. It had seemed like a mere technicality in our shared life. But now, lying in the garage that had become my bedroom, I wondered, was it possible? Could the house still legally be mine alone? The question pulsed with possibility, keeping me wide awake until dawn broke. When I heard Ronald's car leave the driveway for his morning golf game, I immediately reached for my phone and called the one person I knew would help without judgment, Judith. "I need to see you right away," I told her, my voice low, despite being alone. "And I need a favor. Can you quietly find out who legally owns my house?" Judith, who had practiced law before retirement, didn't ask questions. "Come to my place now. I'll make some calls." An hour later, I sat at Judith's kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, as she hung up the phone with a former colleague at her law firm. Her expression shifted from concerned to subtly triumphant as she turned to face me. "The house is solely in your name, Nora. Has been for the past 10 years. Ronald has no legal claim to it whatsoever." She paused, studying my face. "What exactly is going on? You've been vague about why you're staying in the garage." The story poured out of me then. The affair, the children's betrayal, the garage bedroom, the plans to sell the house and move me to a tiny apartment. As I spoke, Judith's expression hardened from concern to outrage. "They can't do this to you," she said firmly when I finished. "And more importantly, you don't have to let them." "What are my options?" I asked, feeling the first stirring of hope in weeks. "Legally, you could have them all evicted. It's your house." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "But I think we can do something even better. Tell me, how attached are you to that house now? Could you bear to part with it? I considered the question carefully. The house had been my home for 4 decades, the backdrop for my children's childhoods, the space where I had built my life. But now it was tainted by betrayal, every room holding memories that had been rewritten by recent events. The thought of returning to live there, even if I could legally reclaim it, felt hollow. I think, I said slowly, that house stopped being my home the moment they moved my bed to the garage. Judith nodded, a plan clearly forming in her mind. One of my former clients is Sarah Williams. She was your student years ago. Remember her? She's a real estate agent now, specialized in quick sales for divorces and estates. Very discreet, very efficient. A vague memory surfaced. A bright-eyed girl with a talent for writing and a determination that stood out even in 4th grade. The one who wrote me a letter every Christmas until she went to PE. That's her. She owes me a favor, and I think she'd be thrilled to help her former teacher. If you're sure about this, I can have her here in an hour. The decision crystallized in my mind with surprising clarity. Make the call. Sarah arrived, looking every bit the successful professional she had become. But her eyes softened with recognition when she saw me. After brief introductions and a compassionate hug, she got straight to business. Mrs. Johnson, Nora, I understand you want to sell your house immediately. Given the circumstances Judith outlined, I recommend a cash sale. It will be below market value, but the speed and certainty might be worth it to you. How quickly could it happen? I asked. With the right buyer, we could close tomorrow. I have several investors who specialize in these situations. People with ready cash looking for good properties they can eventually resell at a profit. She paused, her expression serious. The trade-off is price. You'd probably get about 80% of market value, but it would be done signed and legally binding before anyone could intervene. I thought about the folder. I had found the plans to renovate and sell the house after moving me out. Ronald was planning to sell it anyway. At least this way, the proceeds would be mine. Sarah nodded, already pulling out her phone. Let me make some calls. Do you have the property deed? Judith produced a copy she had obtained that morning from the county records office. While Sarah stepped outside to contact potential buyers, Judith and I discussed logistics. You'll need somewhere to stay tonight, she pointed out. I'll get a hotel room, I replied, realizing I had no desire to spend another night in that garage. And your personal items still at the house. I thought about my belongings, hastily packed into boxes and shoved into the garage. Nothing I can't live without for now. Most of what matters is already in the garage anyway. Sarah returned with remarkable news. She had a buyer willing to pay 75% of market value in cash, ready to close the next morning. All I needed to do was sign the paperwork that evening. He's an investor I've worked with before, she explained. Very professional, no questions asked. He understands the unusual circumstances and is prepared to take possession immediately upon closing. That evening, in the quiet corner of a cafe across town, I signed the documents that would sell the home I had lived in for 40 years. As I wrote my signature on the final page, I felt a weight lifting. Not just the burden of recent betrayals, but perhaps something I had been carrying much longer, the weight of trying to save a marriage that had died long before I was willing to admit it. With the paperwork complete, Sarah handed me a hotel keycard. My gift to you, the penthouse suite at the Lakeside Hotel. It has an excellent view of the sunrise. She winked. You might want to be up early tomorrow to watch it. That night, I slept better than I had in months, cocooned in the luxurious bedding of a hotel room that represented my first step toward freedom. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and likely chaos. But for tonight, I had reclaimed my power through one simple truth. The house they had expelled me from was legally and irrevocably mine to sell. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my body humming with nervous energy, despite the comfortable night's sleep. Sarah had been right about the view. From the penthouse windows, I watched the sun rise over the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and amber. It felt symbolic somehow, this new day dawning, as I prepared to reclaim my dignity. I dressed carefully in clothes I had purchased the previous evening. A tailored navy pantsuit that made me feel armored for the confrontation ahead. At precisely 8 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "The funds have been transferred to your new account," she informed me briskly. "Closing is complete. The house is officially sold. The new owner and his moving team will meet us there at 9. I took a deep breath. "And everyone is still at the house. My assistant drove by 10 minutes ago. All the cars are there. Looks like they're having a family breakfast." I could hear the smile in her voice. Perfect timing. Judith picked me up at 8:30. Her car, packed with the few belongings I had asked her to retrieve from the garage early that morning while everyone was still asleep. "Ready for this?" she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. We arrived at the house. No longer my house, I reminded myself. At precisely 9 o'clock. A moving truck was already parked at the curb, along with Sarah's sleek sedan and a black luxury SUV I assumed belonged to the new owner. 4 men in moving company uniforms were standing by waiting for instructions. As we pulled into the driveway behind Ronald's car, the front door opened. Ronald stepped out, his expression shifting from confusion to irritation as he recognized Judith's car. "What's going on here?" he demanded as I emerged from the passenger seat. His eyes darted to the moving truck and back to me. "What are these people doing at our house?" "Not your house," I corrected calmly. "My house. At least it was until about an hour ago." I gestured to Sarah, who approached with a professional smile, hand extended. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson. I'm Sarah Williams' real estate agent. I've just completed the sale of this property on behalf of the legal owner, Nora Johnson." Ronald's face flushed deep red. "This is ridiculous. You can't sell our house without my consent. I'll have this reversed by noon." "Actually, she can," came a new voice. A well-dressed man in his 40s approached from the moving truck. "I'm Michael Turner, the new owner, and my legal team has thoroughly vetted the sale. The property was solely in Mrs. Johnson's name. The sale is legitimate, and I now own this house and everything permanently attached to it." Ronald stared in disbelief, then turned to rush back inside, presumably to make phone calls. By now, James, Amanda, and Daniel had appeared in the doorway, with Linda hovering uncertainly behind them. "Dad, what's happening?" James asked, his usual confidence wavering. Ronald was already on his phone, pacing and gesturing angrily. "Get me Richard now. Yes, it's an emergency." Richard was his attorney, a man who had helped him structure countless real estate deals over the years. I turned to Michael Turner. "How soon do you need the house vacated?" He checked his watch. "My renovation team is scheduled to arrive at noon. I'd appreciate if personal belongings could be removed by then." His tone was polite, but firm, the voice of a man used to business transactions, proceeding on his timeline. "That should be adequate time," I replied, then faced my family. "You have 3 hours to pack whatever belongs to you. Anything left behind becomes Mr. Turner's property. The chaos that ensued was both painful and vindicating to witness. James began shouting about legal action while frantically calling his own attorney. Amanda burst into tears, accusing me of betrayal, the irony apparently lost on her. Daniel stood silently, his expression a complex mix of shock and what looked almost like respect. Linda disappeared inside, immediately, emerging minutes later with car keys in hand. "I'm not part of this family drama," she announced to no one in particular. "Ronald, call me when you figured this out." And with that, she drove away, leaving Ronald literally standing in the street, still arguing with his lawyer on the phone. I maintained my composure, standing beside Judith, as Sarah efficiently directed the moving team to begin cataloging items for the new owner's inventory. The neighbors had begun to notice the commotion, with several coming onto their porches or pausing their gardening to observe the unfolding drama. Ronald finally ended his call, his face ashen. He approached me with none of his usual confidence. "Richard says the sale is legitimate. The house was only in your name." His voice dropped lower. "Why would you do this? Nora, where are we supposed to go?" The question ignited something in me. All the hurt, humiliation, and anger of the past weeks crystallizing into a moment of perfect clarity. "You put my bed in the garage, Ronald. I put you on the street." The words came out calm and clear. "Seems fair to me." James overheard and stormed over. "This is low, Mom. Even for you. Dad was going to make sure you had an apartment." "Yes, I saw the lease applications," I replied. "For a one-bedroom in Westside Heights. Very generous of him to allocate me that much after 40 years of marriage." James faltered clearly, unaware I had discovered those documents. Amanda joined us, her earlier tears replaced by cold anger. "You've ruined everything." Linda was going to help Dad renovate the house. We were going to make it beautiful again. "And sell it for a profit," I added. "I just beat you to it." "You had no right," she insisted. "I had every right. The house was legally mine. Your father made sure of that 10 years ago for his own purposes. Ironic, isn't it? Only Daniel seemed to grasp the magnitude of what they had done to drive me to this point. He approached cautiously, keeping his distance from Ronald and his siblings. "Where will you go, Mom?" It was the only question asked, out of genuine concern rather than self-interest. "I haven't decided yet," I answered honestly. "But for the first time in months, that decision is entirely mine to make." As the morning progressed, the reality of their situation began to sink in. Ronald, James, and Amanda scrambled to pack essential belongings, arguing over items and blame in equal measure. Several times, Ronald attempted to take things that clearly belonged to the house, built-in fixtures, appliances, only to be firmly stopped by Michael's supervision team. By 11:30, most of their personal items had been loaded into their respective vehicles. The house that had once been so meticulously decorated now stood half empty, the gaps where furniture had been removed like missing teeth in a once perfect smile. Ronald made one final approach as he prepared to leave, his expression a mix of anger and something that might have been grudging respect. "I underestimated you, Nora. I didn't think you had this in you." I met his gaze steadily. "That was your mistake, one of many." As their cars pulled away, one by one, Ronald's last, with a final glance back at the house, I felt no triumph, no joy in their distress. Instead, I experienced something far more valuable, the quiet satisfaction of having stood up for myself when it mattered most. Michael Turner approached as the last car disappeared around the corner. "Mrs. Johnson, I want you to know I respect what you did here today. Not many people have that kind of courage. He handed me his business card. If you ever need anything, references for housing contacts in real estate, please don't hesitate to call. I thanked him, then turned to Judith and Sarah, the two women who had helped make this possible. I think I'm ready to go now. As we drove away, I didn't look back at the house. Instead, I looked ahead through the windshield, watching the road unfold before me, a path I would now navigate on my own terms. The first week after selling the house passed in a blur of practical matters and emotional aftershocks. I extended my stay at the Lakeside Hotel while I considered my next steps, the substantial sum from the house sale providing a financial cushion I had never expected to have. Ronald's reaction was predictable, a flurry of angry texts and voicemails that gradually shifted from threats of legal action to bitter accusations, and finally, to awkward attempts at reconciliation when he realized his comfortable life had been thoroughly upended. Linda, true to form, had disappeared from his life within days of the house sale. Her dreams of becoming the new Mrs. Johnson apparently contingent on inheriting my home and lifestyle. My children's responses varied in ways that revealed much about their characters. James maintained his alliance with Ronald, sending a formal email through his attorney demanding his share of the house proceeds, a request that both Judith and her legal colleagues assured me had no merit. Amanda vacillated between tearful pleas for forgiveness and defensive justifications of her actions, unable to fully acknowledge her role in what had happened. Daniel was the only one who approached me with genuine remorse. 3 days after the sale, he asked to meet for coffee at a neutral location. Sitting across from him at a small cafe downtown, I saw the toll recent events had taken on him. The dark circles under his eyes, the nervous way he twisted his wedding ring. "I should have stood up to them," he began without preamble. "When Dad first suggested moving your things to the garage, I objected, but I didn't push hard enough. I let them convince me it was temporary, that it was somehow for your own good." He met my eyes directly. "I was wrong, and I'm so sorry, Mom." His sincerity touched something in me that I thought might have been permanently hardened by betrayal. "Why did you go along with it at all?" I asked quietly. "You've always been the compassionate one." Daniel sighed deeply. "Dad can be persuasive. He framed everything as helping you transition to a new phase of life. He said you were in denial about the marriage ending, that this would force you to accept reality." He shook his head. "It sounds so cruel saying it out loud now. I don't know how I ever thought it made sense." And the others? James saw it as a business decision, efficient and practical. Amanda was excited about Linda's plans to redesign the house. They both bought into Dad's narrative completely. He hesitated. "Can you ever forgive me?" I considered his question carefully. "Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Daniel. It's a process. I'm still at the beginning of that process with all of you." He nodded, accepting this incomplete absolution with the maturity I had always admired in him. Before we parted, he hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm proud of what you did, Mom. You taught us all something important." Judith proved invaluable during this time, not just as a legal advisor, but as the friend who kept me grounded when emotions threatened to overwhelm me. One evening, as we shared dinner in my hotel suite, she posed the question I had been avoiding. "Where do you want to live now, Nora? You can go anywhere, be anyone. What do you want?" The question startled me. For 40 years, my identity had been defined by my roles: Ronald's wife, the children's mother, the elementary school teacher, the keeper of our family home. Now, With the freedom to choose solely for myself, I felt both exhilarated and terrified. I always loved the coast, I found myself saying. Remember those summer trips we took to Cedar Cove? When the kids were small, Ronald always complained about the salt air and the sand, but I felt so alive there. Judith's eyes lit up. Cedar Cove is only a 2-hour drive. Why don't we take a day trip this weekend? See if it still feels right to you. That Saturday, we drove to the coastal town I had loved from afar for decades. It had changed, of course. More tourist shops, fancier restaurants. But the essential character remained the rhythmic sound of waves against the shore, the call of seagulls, the particular quality of light reflecting off the water. We were walking along the main street when I spotted a small cottage set back from the road, partially hidden by overgrown hydrangea bushes, a weathered "for sale" sign tilted in the front yard. Something about its blue shutters and wraparound porch called to me, and I found myself stopping to peer through the gate. Interested in the old Williams place? A voice startled me. An elderly man had paused his gardening in the neighboring yard. Been empty about a year now. Belonged to my friend Margaret before she passed. Shame to see it sitting empty. It needs someone who'll love it. On impulse, I asked for the real estate contact, and by that afternoon, I was walking through rooms that somehow felt more like home than the house I had lived in for 40 years ever had. It needed work. The kitchen was outdated, the garden overgrown, but I could see its potential immediately. More importantly, I could see myself there creating a new life from the ground up. The purchase moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, I became the owner of a seaside cottage with blue shutters, a place that had no memories attached, no ghosts of betrayal haunting its corners. Each piece of furniture I selected, each color I painted the walls, each plant I added to the garden, was chosen solely for my own pleasure, a novel, an intoxicating experience. As I settled into my new home, I made another significant decision. I would not return to teaching that school year. After 30 years in the classroom, I deserved a break to focus on healing. The principal was understanding, offering me early retirement with full benefits, which further secured my financial independence. The first few weeks alone were challenging. There were nights I woke disoriented, reaching across the bed for a husband who was no longer there, moments during the day when I picked up my phone to share a thought with children who had betrayed my trust. But gradually, a new rhythm emerged. Morning walks along the beach, afternoons, tending my garden, or reading books I had always meant to get to, evenings watching the sunset from my porch with a glass of wine. I began to meet people, neighbors who invited me for barbecues, a book club that gathered at the local library, a community garden group looking for volunteers. Without the weight of a troubled marriage and family tensions, I found myself more open, more authentically myself than I had been in years. It was in the community garden that I met Eleanor, a widow in her 70s, with a wicked sense of humor and a talent for growing heirloom tomatoes. After working side by side for several weeks, she invited me to her home for lunch, where she shared her own story of starting over after loss. The hardest part, she told me as we sat on her patio, is learning to define yourself by what you're moving toward rather than what you're leaving behind. Her words resonated deeply, helping me recognize that I had been clinging to anger as a way to avoid the harder work of reimagining my future. That evening, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset, and made a conscious decision to release some of the bitterness I had been carrying. Not for Ronald's sake, or even my children's, but for my own peace of mind. The cottage gradually transformed from a shelter into a home. I painted the living room a warm coral that reminded me of sunset, planted lavender along the garden path, and set up a small art studio in the spare bedroom where I could experiment with watercolors, a hobby I had abandoned decades ago when Ronald dismissed it as impractical. As the months passed, my relationship with my children continued to evolve. James maintained his distance, occasional formal emails our only contact. Amanda made halting attempts at reconciliation, calling every few weeks with superficial conversation that carefully avoided any mention of what had happened. Daniel visited regularly, sometimes bringing his wife and children, helping with projects around the cottage, and slowly rebuilding our bond. Ronald's trajectory was predictable. After the initial shock wore off, he leveraged his real estate connections to secure a comfortable apartment and began dating again. Through Daniel, I learned he had begun constructing a narrative in which I was portrayed as unstable and vindictive, a story that seemed to bring him comfort, but found few believers among those who knew us both. 1 year after I sold the house and reclaimed my life, I hosted a small gathering at my cottage. Judith Daniel and his family, a few new friends from Cedar Cove. As we shared a meal on my porch, overlooking the ocean, I realized with sudden clarity that I was happy, genuinely, deeply happy, perhaps for the first time in many years. As I sit on my porch, watching the waves roll in, it's hard to believe a full year has passed since the day I sold the house from under my family's feet. The cottage has transformed along with me. The overgrown garden now blooms with carefully tended roses and lavender. The kitchen gleams with new countertops and appliances I selected myself, and the walls display watercolor paintings I've created during long, peaceful afternoons. The process of rebuilding wasn't always easy. Those first few months alone tested me in ways I hadn't anticipated. There were nights I woke in panic, disoriented by the unfamiliar sounds of waves instead of suburban traffic. There were holidays that stretched before me like deserts of solitude. There were moments when anger would surge unexpectedly, triggered by a song on the radio or a familiar scent that transported me back to the garage bedroom. What surprised me most was discovering how much of myself I had slowly surrendered over 40 years of marriage. It wasn't just Ronald's betrayal that had diminished me, but 1,000 tiny compromises I had made so gradually I barely noticed them accumulating. My favorite music relegated to headphones because he found it irritating. My passion for art abandoned because he saw no practical value in it. My friendships narrowed to those couples he approved of. Even my wardrobe had evolved to suit his preferences rather than my own. Each discovery brought both grief for time lost and joy in reclamation. I bought bright, flowing dresses that Ronald would have deemed too young for me. I played my favorite jazz albums at full volume while painting. I reconnected with old friends through social media and made new ones who knew me only as I am now, not as an extension of a marriage. My relationship with my children continues to evolve, teaching me difficult lessons about love, forgiveness, and boundaries. James remained distant for months, his pride apparently preventing him from acknowledging his role in what happened. Then, unexpectedly, he appeared at my door one Sunday afternoon, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Dad's engaged again," he said without preamble. To someone new, not Linda. They're planning to move to Arizona. I invited him in, sensing there was more to this visit than delivering news I frankly had little interest in. We sat awkwardly in my living room, the space between us filled with unspoken recriminations. Seeing Dad repeat the same pattern made me think. He finally continued. About what happened with you, about my part in it. He looked around my cottage, taking in the evidence of my new life. You seem good, Mom. Better than before. I am, I confirmed, neither softening the truth nor wielding it as a weapon. I'm sorry, he said finally. I got caught up in Dad's version of events. I convinced myself we were doing what was best for everyone. He met my eyes directly. I was wrong. His apology wasn't perfect. There was still a trace of the businessman making a calculated move to resolve an outstanding issue. But it was genuine enough for me to accept it as a starting point. Our relationship remains a work in progress, cautious texts and occasional phone calls, slowly rebuilding what was broken. Amanda's path to reconciliation has been more emotional and erratic. She swings between tearful apologies and defensive justifications, still struggling to fully acknowledge the cruelty of what they did. During her last visit, as we walked along the beach, she finally asked the question that seemed to haunt her. How could you just start over like this? Aren't you scared sometimes? I considered her question carefully. Of course I'm scared sometimes. But I was more afraid of disappearing inside a life that no longer valued me. She was quiet for a long time after that. And when she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its defensive edge. Your cottage is beautiful. It suits you in a way the house never did. It was a small acknowledgement, but an important one. Recognition that perhaps the life they had tried to force me into wasn't the one I was meant to have. Daniel has been my most consistent supporter, visiting monthly with his wife and children, helping with household projects, and becoming the bridge that keeps me connected to family news I might otherwise miss. During his last visit, while we were planting tulip bulbs for next spring, he shared something that brought both pain and validation. Dad tells everyone you had some kind of breakdown, that selling the house was a vindictive impulse you now regret. He pressed soil firmly over a bulb. But last week at James's birthday dinner, when he thought I wasn't listening, he told his new fiancée that underestimating you was the biggest mistake of his life. Daniel looked up with a small smile. I think that's the closest he'll ever come to admitting you outsmarted him. As for me, I've found unexpected joy in this new chapter of life. I volunteer 3 mornings a week at the local elementary school, helping children discover the magic of reading, just as I did during my teaching career. I have joined a watercolor group that meets on Thursdays at the community center, where my paintings have improved enough to be included in the annual art fair. I've made friends who know me as Nora, not as Ronald's wife or the children's mother, but simply as myself. Eleanor from the community garden has become particularly dear to me. At 77, with 30 years of widowhood behind her, she navigates life with a grace and humor I aspire to. The secret, she told me recently, as we deadheaded roses, is to wake up each morning and ask yourself what would bring you joy today, not what would have brought you joy 20 years ago. I've taken her wisdom to heart, allowing myself to evolve, rather than clinging to outdated versions of happiness. Sometimes, joy is as simple as watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee on my porch. Sometimes, it's the satisfaction of hanging a new painting I've created. Sometimes it's the laughter shared with new friends over dinner. Ronald and I finalized our divorce 6 months ago, a surprisingly anticlimactic event after the drama that preceded it. The legal document merely confirmed what we both already knew. Our marriage had ended long before I discovered his affair, perhaps even before he began looking elsewhere. The true failure wasn't infidelity, but the slow erosion of respect and kindness between two people who had once promised to cherish each other. The most profound lesson I've learned this year is about the nature of strength. I always thought strength meant endurance, the ability to weather storms without breaking. Now I understand that sometimes true strength is having the courage to walk away, to demand better, to rebuild from scratch, rather than inhabit a damaged structure. When my family put my bed in the garage, they thought they were writing the final chapter of my story, a sad epilogue about an aging woman relegated to the margins of her own life. Instead, they inadvertently gave me the push I needed to reclaim my narrative and write a bold new beginning. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever swallowed your worth to keep the peace, if you've ever wondered if it's too late to start again, let my story be your permission slip. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to demand dignity. It's never too late to discover who you might become when you finally put yourself first. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more accounts of women reclaiming their power. Thank you for listening to my journey from garage to seaside cottage, from invisibility to empowerment. Remember, sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a better one.